Hello students, welcome to BYJU'S IAS. In today's live session, let's have a discussion related to certain very important economy related events that have taken place between 16th of October to 22nd October 2021. Let's start the discussion now. The first very important article that is being discussed for the last couple of weeks is the concept of capital account convertibility. Now, certain very basic points here. Concept of capital account is associated with balance of payments. I am pretty sure those who are preparing for the exams will know the idea of a balance of payments. Traditionally, we say that balance of payments is divided into two parts or two accounts. One is called as a current account and the second one is called as a capital account. But of recently, there is a third account also which is referred to as a financial account. Now, what is the important point here? In case of the current account, we have full convertibility. Post 1994, we have introduced the concept of full convertibility in case of current account, whereas in case of the capital account, even today we have partial convertibility. Now, the simple meaning of the terms convertibility here refers to, in case of the current account, there are certain transactions. In case of capital account, there are certain transactions. The basic difference between both of them is, in case of the current account, there are transactions which are related to income of a particular country. For example, you will be generating income by exporting. You will be generating income by exporting goods or services. You will be paying certain amount by importing certain goods or services. So, generally in the concept of the current account, you have the transactions which are related to income of a particular country. Whereas on the other hand, in case of the capital account, you have transactions which are related to assets. Is it okay? Remember this. In case of capital account, I am repeating it, it is important. You have transactions which are related to creation of assets in a particular country. So, that is a basic difference. So, the idea of a convertibility is the government or is the central banker allowing you to convert, let us say, rupees into dollars as well as vice versa freely, or there are certain restrictions with respect to the conversion. The idea of a convertibility means what? Right, is there freedom for you to convert your rupees into dollars and vice versa without any restriction. In case of the current account, there are no restriction. In case of the capital account, there are certain restrictions. That is the precise reason the books will simply use a statement saying that in case of the current account, there is full convertibility, in capital account, there is partial convertibility. Now, over a period of time, there are two committees which were set up by the government, both headed by the same person, Tarapore Committee. Okay, very important, remember the name, SS Tarapore Committee, and this particular committee imposed certain conditions or gave certain prescriptions as to follow the concept of full capital account convertibility in case of India. Now, some of you will be thinking, sir, what is the advantage of having a full capital account convertibility? Because the RBI governor in recent discussions has stated that the idea of a capital account convertibility will be followed as a process, not as an event. Meaning what? Over a period of time, we will introduce certain measures or reforms as a result of which there is a full convertibility in case of capital account. So, do not assume that capital account convertibility will be done in a single event or a single instance or a single reform. It will be a continued process. So, in simple terms, the argument here is there is capital account convertibility, but there are certain restrictions. Hence, we say that in case of capital account, there is no full convertibility in case of this. Now, what is the argument here? Why that is discussed? What is the need for a full capital account convertibility, or what are the issues or concerns generally discussed in the context of a full capital account convertibility? Whenever you talk about capital account, we have already associated that with the concept of an asset. So, the advantages of having a full capital account convertibility will be, one, it will integrate the Indian economy with the global market. Further integration will take place. That is the first very important advantage. Second, with full capital account convertibility, the Indian companies might get access to cheaper capital from the international market. Third important advantage will be, it will promote the concept of ease of doing business or ease of investment in the Indian economy. And the fourth very important advantage will be, lot of investment is expected to flow into India if there is a full capital account convertibility. As of now, huge amount of FDI flows into India, huge amount of FPI, foreign institution investment, flows into the stock market. right? These are some of the advantages that are associated with the concept of full capital account convertibility. Having said so, historically there have been certain concerns which have been raised against the concept of full capital account convertibility. What are the concerns? One, if there is a full capital account convertibility, the foreign investments no doubt will flow into India. But what if there are certain issues with respect to macroeconomic norms of India? For example, fiscal deficit of Government of India increases, public debt of the government is at all-time high, inflation rates are also increasing. In certain situations like this, you might see that foreign investors will take their investment and move out of India, and that will create certain instability in the market, not only in the stock market or let's say the debt market, but even in case of the forex market also. That is one concern. Second concern, imagine Indian economy is doing very well, but there is imagine a situation of Fed tapering taking place in case of USA, or there are better interest rates that are available in other economies. At that particular situation, what you can see is these foreign investors, because there are no restrictions with respect to the conversion, can simply take their investments, take all of their investments out of India, which will create instability in India. Third concern which has been raised by various previous RBI governors is that in case there is a full convertibility allowed in case of let's say capital account, there will be certain speculative investments, that is those investments which are done only to earn returns in case of India. This investment is not going to be productive in case of India. These investments will flow into India only to earn better returns. So Indian economy may not get any benefit out of these investments. And the fourth very important issue of concern here is, with higher investments which are flowing into India like this, with full capital account convertibility, there will be volatilities in case of exchange rates. Is it okay? There will be huge volatility in case of exchange rates, and that will definitely have an impact on the trade competitiveness of India's exports in the international market. So these are some of the concerns which have been raised with respect to allowing full capital account convertibility in case of Indian economy. Now, in case of this particular article, basically that is what they have discussed. They have not discussed the critical evaluation part, but they have basically discussed that in the last couple of years, Government of India as well as RBI have taken certain reforms which will basically indicate that India is moving towards full capital account convertibility. For example, they have mentioned the reforms such as a fully accessible route, wherein non-resident investors are allowed to invest in certain government securities issued by the Government of India. In addition to this, FDI reforms have been introduced, as a result of which huge amount of investment is coming under the capital account into India. So there are certain reforms which have been taken by the government as well as RBI, which is basically taking India towards the concept of a capital account convertibility. Having said so, the article also mentions that despite discussing the concept of full capital account convertibility, even today we have not implemented some of the recommendations which were given by Tharapure committee. For example, Tharapure committee, first committee was set up in the year 1997 and the second Tharapure committee was set up in the year 2006. In case of 1997, certain important preconditions that were prescribed by this committee in order to go for full capital account convertibility was: 1. Reducing the fiscal deficit to below 3.5% or to 3.5%, in controlling the inflation rate between 3 to 5%, implementing certain very important reforms in the financial market which will strengthen the financial market. For example, reducing the NPAs, right, amalgamating or closing down the weaker banks in the Indian economy. So if you see these particular preconditions, none of these particular preconditions are actually met or actually present in case of Indian economy. So without achieving these particular preconditions or without taking the economy to these particular preconditions, it would be very risky to go for full capital account convertibility in case of India. So this is the gist of the article provided here. Now based on this particular discussion, I have given a question here. Consider the following statements regarding capital account. First one, consists of transactions related to assets. True. India has full convertibility under the capital account. This is wrong. Narsimhan committee was set up which in terms of promoting or regarding the path to full capital account convertibility. Even this particular statement is wrong. Narsimhan committee is more associated with the banking sector reforms and not the full convertibility. So only the first statement is true. Right option will be option A, only one. Next article related to rice exports. Now, what is the gist of the article here? I am not going to discuss the concept of a GM crop here, but the basic idea of a GM is genetically modified crop, where we are going to alter the genetic makeup of a particular crop or a particular plant or an animal to meet certain objectives, right? In case of India, understand this, there is only one crop which is allowed, right? That is a GM crop which is allowed for commercial production. Remember this, and that is BT cotton. Now, this particular article discusses, right, that there is a certain GM crop contamination in case of rice exports which are done from India to rest of the world. The gist of the article is simply this: India annually exports more than 18 million tons of rice to the rest of the world. India is one of the largest exporters. In fact, I will show you the data. Between 2017 to 2020, India is the largest exporter of rice to the international market. Now, within this, the value of the rice which is exported comes to around more than 60,000 crore rupees. One newspaper article has quoted it as 65,000, another article has quoted it to be 63,000 crores. So, basically, to be safer, on a safer side, you can simply say that the total value of rice exports annually are more than 60,000 crore rupees. And these particular rice exports which are done from India to rest of the world reach actually more than 70 countries. Now, the argument here is post-June, more than 500 tons of rice has been exported, and the allegation is that this particular rice which has been exported post-June to European markets basically has a GM contamination. It has a rice variety which is a GM rice or genetically modified rice variety which is not allowed to be imported into the European markets. And as a result of this, there is a concern that this might affect the overall rice exports or agriculture sector exports from India to rest of the world. This is the gist of the article. But beyond this, right, please understand, beyond this, what are the important points? I have taken this particular picture from today's Hindu itself. What are the important points from this particular picture that you are supposed to know? First, very important point, between the financial year 17 to financial year 22, that is in the last 5 financial years, the total value of rice exports have accounted to more than $40 billion. Is it okay? More than $40 billion worth of rice exports have been done from India to rest of the world in the last 5 financial years. Second, over 90% of India's rice exports basically go to 2 continents or countries from 2 continents. One is within Asia, right? Many countries are importing rice from India, and the second one is the African countries. More than 90%, you can see this, right? Within Asian countries itself, more than 60% of India's rice exports are done, and the remaining 25% plus are basically exported to African countries. That is the second very important factual information you will have to remember. Third one, what about the European countries? Because the crux of the matter, or at the center of it, there is a European country. So what about the European countries? More than 10% of the rice that is imported by the European countries are basically the rice exports are done from India. This is the third very important factual point. Fourth very important point, if you consider the overall exports are done from India to rest of the world, in the last 5 years, that is financial year 17 to financial year 22, rice exports that are done from India will be in the top 5 exports. Is it okay? Top 5 exports, one of them is rice. In fact, the 5th largest export between financial year 17 to 22 is rice itself. In addition to this, this picture will also give you information as to which are the top exports which are done from India to rest of the world. At the helm or at the top, there is a petroleum products. Second highest is diamonds. Third is the jewelry, right? And the 5th one is rice. So these are the topmost exports which are done from India to rest of the world, right? So these are certain very important points with respect to the rice exports which are being discussed in the recent times. In addition to this, there is one more graph here, right? As already mentioned, India is the largest exporter of rice in the international market, but this graph basically gives you data between financial year 17 to financial year 20. Okay, so for 3 financial years the data has been provided, and it accounts for more than 30% of the total rice exports are done to the international market, and the value of exports of rice which are done from India to rest of the world are valued at more than $30 billion for these particular financial years. So these are certain very important points. Please be very, very careful. For a simple reason, in this year there was no trend based question in case of economics, and there was no question even on the economic reports. So please be very, very careful. It only indicates that the probability of such questions being asked in the next year will be very, very high. Now, in addition to this, whatever we discussed, in regards to this, I have given a question here, straightforward question. Consider the following statement regarding exports of rice. First one, between financial year 17 to 22, right? Rather than using this, they might simply say in the last 5 fiscals or last 5 financial years, India's rice exports are over $40 billion. Factual information, we have seen this, it's true. Second one, majority of India's rice exports are done to European countries, because there is a discussion from the European market, right? This could be a tempting statement for you, but this particular statement is wrong. If you see this particular picture here, you can see that, right, more than 60% of the rice exports that are done from India are basically going to other Asian countries, not to Europe. So second statement is wrong. Right option here will be option A, only one is correct or true. Let's go to the next article. India is on the cusp of a virtuous cycle. Okay, very recently one of the institutions have come out or has come out with a report which basically states that India is on the rise, or the Indian economy will be experiencing a virtuous cycle of growth in the coming days. Now the question here is not the report itself, but what is the concept of a virtuous cycle, right? Generally this is discussed in certain newspapers, and very recently in the prelims that has happened, there was a question related to concept of a virtuous cycle and a vicious cycle itself. That is a question based on the government expenditure to revive growth in a particular economy. Now the argument here is there are two types of cycles which are associated to growth in a particular economy. One is called as virtuous cycle of a growth, and the second one is called as a vicious cycle of a growth. Okay, one is a virtuous cycle of a growth, second one is a vicious cycle of a growth. What is the meaning of this? In every economy, there are certain factors which are going to reinforce each other. That is, there are multiple factors which are going to have an effect on each other. As a result of this, either you can achieve a negative outcome in the economy, or you can achieve a positive outcome in the economy. Generally, a positive outcome such as increased employment generation, increased production, increased output, increased GDP, all of these are the outcomes of a virtuous or a virtuous growth cycle. And on the other hand, if the outcomes are higher unemployment rate, right, the incomes of the households declining, declining production in the manufacturing sector, GDP growth rate falling down or entering into, let's say, negative growth, all of these are the outcomes of the vicious cycle of a growth. And this particular article mentions that in the next couple of years, that is between financial year 21 to financial year 26, is it okay? Financial year 21 to financial year 26, the capex, what is a capex? Capex basically stands for capital expenditure. Okay, the capex will increase by 6 percentage points. Understand the statement here? As per this particular article, the capex in case of India between financial year 21 to financial year 26 is going to increase by 6 percentage points. Now, what is the meaning of this? How it is connected to virtuous cycle of a growth? Argument here is, if the capital expenditure increases in any economy, it essentially means what? Investment will increase, and when investment increases, the overall production in the economy will increase, employment generation increases, and when employment generation increases, more incomes are going to flow to the households, and when more incomes go to the households, the overall demand or aggregate demand from the households will also increase, and when the demand increases, again the production will increase, employment will increase, the household incomes are going to increase, the demand is going to increase. So these are the various factors which are going to reinforce each other, have an impact on each other, as a result of which you are going to get certain positive outcomes such as higher GDP growth rate, increasing GDP in a particular economy, and this kind of a cycle is called as a virtuous cycle. until very recently Indian economy was going through a vicious cycle, and when we are going to increase the capital expenditure, you might expect onset of a virtuous cycle in case of an economy, and that is what we want to happen in case of Indian economy. And this particular article also says that between this particular financial year 23 to financial year 26, the GDP growth rate in case of Indian economy will be averaging around 7%. So these are certain very important points that have been discussed in this particular article. Let me go to the next article. Food Corporation of India has very recently announced that they are going to adopt a new methodology to procure or buy rice in the market. Now, I am not going to discuss what is the procurement policy of the FCI, that is not important. In earlier videos, we have already discussed this. But what is the FCI saying here? Generally, the process is, follow this very carefully, FCI will purchase, let's say, rice from certain sellers in the market. Is it okay? Right? That is, there are certain participants in the market on behalf of the state government who will, right, basically purchase paddy, right, clear them or purify them and sell rice to Food Corporation of India. And Food Corporation of India will distribute this particular rice under the concept of public distribution system. Now, it has been found that these particular people who are milling, or the millers as such, these particular millers are colluding with the officials who are participating in the public distribution system. The rice which is supposed to be given to the beneficiaries under PDS, these PDS officials are selling it to millers. Okay, understand the cycle here. The millers basically procure paddy, right, purify this, sell rice or clear this and sell rice to Food Corporation of India, which will distribute under PDS this particular rice to beneficiaries. Now, rather than this particular rice going to the beneficiaries, it has been found that the officials who are present in the PDS system, they are selling this particular rice again to some of these particular millers. And what are these particular millers doing? They are basically mixing this particular rice with the newly procured rice and they are selling it again to Food Corporation of India. Some of you will be thinking, sir, why is this particular circus going on? The argument is very simple here. When Food Corporation of India will purchase the food grains from these particular millers, the article says that FCI pays for every kg 32 rupees. And on the other hand, these particular millers will basically collude with the officials who are responsible for distribution or distributing these particular food grains and purchase the rice at 15 rupees per kg. And they will sell this particular rice after mixing with the newly obtained rice again to Food Corporation of India at 32 rupees. As a result of this, one, Food Corporation of India is incurring huge amount of a loss, and the second one, the rice which is supposed to go to the beneficiaries is getting misused in the system. So, Food Corporation of India says, I will introduce a new methodology wherein I will try to find out what is the age of the rice. Is it okay? I am going to introduce a new test. I am going to conduct a test of certain samples of the rice which is supplied to me by the millers, and I will try to find out what is the age of the rice. And this particular test which FCI will introduce from the upcoming season is mixed indicator method. Remember the name here? Mixed indicator method. Why this is important? In case of next year prelims, UPSC might simply throw a question based on this. A statement such as this could be given by UPSC. The term mixed indicator method recently seen in news is associated with what? Right? So, you will have to remember the name. Food Corporation of India says, I am going to introduce a new test which is referred to as a mixed indicator method, using which I will try to find out the age of some of the samples of rice which I am going to purchase from these particular millers, so that I will try to establish that the rice I am going to purchase is the new rice, it is not the same rice which is supposed to be distributed under the PDS system. This is the new method which is proposed to be implemented by Food Corporation of India from the upcoming procurement season. Done? So, this is the gist of the article provided here. Right? Beyond that, nothing much is important in the article. Do not try to mug up everything. Next important article, concept of faceless assessment scheme. Why this was there in the newspaper? many of these particular high courts have found that there is a misrepresentation, or let's say the miscalculation with respect to assessment officers under the concept of a faceless assessment scheme. Now the question is, what do you mean by faceless assessment scheme? Earlier, the government introduced a scheme called as e-assessment scheme, and later renamed this particular e-assessment scheme as a faceless assessment scheme, FAS. I will use a short form henceforth. But understand the logic here. The FAS was not introduced as a single reform by the government. Basically, government in the August 2020 introduced a new scheme or a new program by the name transparent taxation. Remember the name here? Transparent taxation, honoring the honest taxpayers. Is it okay? Honoring the honest taxpayers. So a platform or a scheme by the name of this was launched by the government. And under this particular concept of transparent taxation, there were three very important pillars. One, the name of the pillar was Faceless Assessment Scheme, FAS. Second important pillar was Faceless Appeal Scheme, okay, Faceless Appeal Scheme. And the third important pillar was Taxpayer Charter. Is it a Taxpayer Charter? These were the three very important pillars which were launched by the government under the concept of a transparent taxation. The logic here is very simple. Imagine you are a taxpayer. Whenever you pay the tax and file the documents, the whole process is called as income tax returns filing. So the returns which you have filed has to be assessed, whether you have filed the right amount of income tax or not, have you quoted all the sources of income or not, etc. have to be identified. In this particular scheme, that is a faceless assessment scheme, your income tax returns could be allocated to any assessing officer throughout India. And through this, Government of India wanted to introduce a transparent taxation methodology. That is, basically there is no collusion or corruption in the system, right? The process will be much more transparent, the corruption will be addressed, and it will become faceless. That is very, very important. The whole process would be made faceless. That is, the documents that you file, right? The documents that you file, the allocation of these particular returns to any official, all of this particular process will become faceless now. There will be no face-to-face interaction between the taxpayer as well as the tax official. That is the whole idea of a transparent taxation methodology under which we have introduced a faceless assessment scheme. And in addition to this, very recently, understand this, from this year itself, the CBDT, Central Board of Direct Taxes, has also introduced the concept of faceless penalty scheme, FPS, remember this, right? As such, FAS has been introduced, faceless appeal system has been introduced, taxpayer charter has been launched, and the fourth very important reform launched by the CBDT, Central Board of Direct Taxes, very recently, that is in this year, is the concept of faceless penalty scheme. Now the article basically says that despite Government of India trying to reduce the litigation, trying to reduce the collusion in the system or corruption in the system, trying to make the process much more transparent, right, the government has introduced these kinds of reforms. Having said so, generally what happens is the assessing officers, many of the high courts have found that the assessing officer are not following the guidelines promptly, as a result of which the litigation in the system has actually increased, and the amount of the tax that they have demanded under the concept of faceless assessment as well as faceless appeal are illogical. There is no logical application of the law that has been followed by these particular assessing officers. And that is the precise reason the article headline simply says that faceless assessment schemes draw legal ire. That is basically the courts have found that the officials are not abiding by the guidelines which have been introduced under this particular system. So this is the gist of the article provided here. Now based on this, I have given a question here. Consider the following statements. Transparent taxation, honoring the honest, deals with direct and indirect taxes. Very tricky, right? Most of you will feel yes, it is correct, but the answer is wrong, or the statement is wrong. Why? This particular concept of transparent taxation, honoring the honest, basically deals with the direct taxes but not indirect taxes. Please understand, In the last couple of years, government has introduced many of these particular reforms to address the issues both in case of direct taxes as well as indirect taxes. For example, there was a scheme by the name Sabka Vishwas. There was one more scheme, Vivad Se Vishwas, right? We have introduced a transparent taxation methodology. We have also basically increased the threshold level of filing appeals in various cases by the taxation authorities. So many of these particular reforms have been taken by the government in the last couple of years in order to address the issues in case of the direct taxes as well as the indirect taxes. But this particular scheme, or let's say the platform by the name transparent taxation methodology, it deals with the direct taxes but not indirect taxes. So first statement wrong. As a part of this, government has introduced Sabka Vishwas scheme. Sabka Vishwas scheme was more associated with the legacy dispute cases in case of indirect taxes such as excise duties. It is not associated with the direct taxes. In fact, in case of direct taxes, the name of the scheme that was introduced by the government was Vivad Se Vishwas scheme, and that too it was introduced as an independent scheme, not as a part of transparent taxation methodology. Done? So even the second statement is wrong. Right option will be option D. None of the statements are true. Let's go to the next article related to voluntary retention route. RBI is likely to raise investment limit under VRR. Now, in gist, right, in a quick representation, what do you mean by VRR, voluntary retention route? RBI, in order to attract long-term investments in the debt market, remember the technical terms here, RBI, in order to attract long-term investments in debt market, introduced the route called as voluntary retention route. There are other routes already, right? In addition to voluntary retention route, now there is a fully accessible route, right? Earlier there was a long-term investment route, but the argument here is this was introduced in order to attract long-term investments in the debt market. And under this particular VRR, which is completely voluntary for these particular foreign portfolio investors, these particular FPIs will have to agree or have to give an undertaking to invest at least 75% of their investments in G securities for at least 3 years in case of Indian market. Is it okay? At least 75% of their investments in the debt instruments has to be held in Indian market for at least 3 years. Only those foreign investors who agree to this or who voluntarily say that we will abide by this particular guideline will be allowed to invest under the VRR. And as a result of this, the advantage for them is generally when you have debt investments coming from foreign investors, these investments will come under regulations, certain conditions. These conditions will be loosened up, will be relaxed for these investments. Now, what is the gist of the article provided here? Generally from 1 year to next year, based on the demand for the investments under this, based on the utilization of a limit under the VRR, RBI revises the limit. Is it okay? Right? That is done generally at the end of the year. But the article mentions that because in the recent times, the foreign investors in search of better returns, in search of higher returns, have invested huge amount of money in government securities in India. For example, have a look at the data here. In case of the US Treasury, the benchmark US Treasury provides you an yield rate of around 1.6%. As against this, India's benchmark Treasury, that is a government security issued by the government, is providing a yield rate of around 6.34%. So whenever there is a foreign investor, most important objective for them will be better returns. They want to earn higher returns by investing in the market. So when Indian treasuries or benchmark treasuries are going to provide such huge amount of return, obviously they will come and start investing in these particular treasuries. As a result of this, the allocation that was done by the RBI under VRR, government securities, remember this, VRR is there for government securities, VRR is there for corporate securities, VRR is also there for combined, that is government securities as well as the corporate securities. So under this particular VRR route, the amount that is given or amount that is allowed by RBI has already been satisfied. There is a huge amount of investment that is actually coming in. There is a higher demand to increase this particular VRR limit. And the article basically says because the amount of limit has already been exhausted, RBI might revise this even before the end of the year, which is generally followed by RBI. Done? So this is the gist of the article provided here with respect to concept of VRR. Next, 24/7 rural power supply. Let's try and understand certain basic importance points first before looking at the article here. The concept of power for all, that is 24/7 power for all, is not anything new. Earlier governments also have spoken about providing 24/7 power for all. In fact, back in the year 2002, the government of India announced that they will be providing power for all by 2012. Is it okay? By 2012, they would be providing power for all, 24/7 electricity for everyone in India. But this particular objective by 2012 was not met. It was not achieved by the government at that particular point of time. So what happened was, in 2014, a new government was formed, and that government basically stated that in the next 5 years, is it okay? In the next 5 years, that is by 2018 and 2019, we are going to achieve supplying the power for all in case of India. 24/7 power for all will be supplied. And to implement this, there was a MOU, that is Memorandum of Understanding, which was signed between the central government as well as the state governments as well as the union territories. Is it okay? Remember this. The power for all scheme, it is name of a scheme, okay? The power for all scheme was basically implemented as a joint venture between the central government and the state governments as well as union territories. And as per this particular MOU, by 1st of April 2019, the states were supposed to supply power for all or 24/7 electricity for everyone. So what is the status? As per the recent data which has been given or which has been submitted by the government in parliament, the article mentions that there are certain states wherein in case of a rural India, they have not been able to supply the power for all, that is 24/7 electricity has not yet been met. Whereas in case of urban India, over a period of time, especially in case of urban India, the 24/7 electricity is being supplied. For example, there are states such as Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, Maharashtra, etc., which are providing almost 24 hours of electricity to urban parts in respective states. Having said so, there are also certain other states such as Himachal Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka, Tripura, etc., which are falling behind in terms of providing electricity, that is 24/7 electricity in their rural parts or respective rural parts. In fact, the article mentions that these particular states which are the lowest 5, right, which are the lowest 5 in terms of providing electricity in their respective rural parts of the states, are providing more than 23 hours of electricity in their particular states, but in urban parts. Is it okay? I'll repeat it. The bottom 5 states such as Himachal Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka, Tripura, etc., they are able to provide 23 hours of electricity per day to their urban parts. But on an average, they are supplying somewhere in the range of 15 to 18 hours of electricity in case of their rural parts. Now, some of you might be thinking, sir, you are simply saying that these states are able to provide 23 to 24 hours of electricity. But I am a person who is living in urban India or urban part of any of these particular states, but in my state or in my particular area, I am seeing that there is power disruption. The central government says that we are able to achieve almost 24 hours in many of these particular states in urban India, and if there is a power disruption, it is not because there is a scarcity of electricity. It is not because there is no available electricity, rather it is because of certain issues in the DISCOM sector. Is it okay? Because please understand, electricity segment will have 3 very important pillars. One is production or generation, second one is basically transmission, and the third one is a distribution. The central government saying is the first part, that is the generation. We have a huge amount of a generation capacity in case of India. So there is no scarcity, there is no deficit with respect to electricity production. But if you are experiencing power cuts in your area, that is because there are certain issues in the DISCOM or distribution. And that is certain important points which have been provided here. Having said so, the article also mentions that the survey was conducted by NITI Aayog. Right? NITI Aayog conducted a survey and it has found out that both in case of urban India as well as rural India, people are not happy or not satisfied with respect to amount of power or electricity that is supplied in their particular region. In addition to this, just for factual information, remember this, in case of urban India as well as rural India, between 2018-2019 to to 2021, that is the financial year 19 to financial year 21. In case of rural India, the amount of electricity supply has increased just marginally. In case of financial year 19, it was 20 hours 41 minutes, and by financial year 21, this has just increased marginally to 21 hour 9 minutes, just over 18 minutes on an average it has increased. Whereas if you compare the same 2 years or the data for these 2 financial years for urban India, there is a huge jump in the energy supply or electricity supply. For financial year 19, in case of urban India, it was 24 hours 43 minutes, that is for financial year 19, and by financial year 21, this has jumped to 23 hours 35 minutes, very close to 24 hours of electricity supply. So these are some of the very important points that are being discussed in this particular article. Now for some of you who might be thinking, sir, what is the importance of this? Please understand, having stable as well as quality electricity supply is very important. Many of these particular social objectives as well as economic objectives such as growth rate can be achieved when you have sustained quality electricity supply both in case of urban India as well as rural India. And that is the precise reason under Power for All scheme, Government of India has mandated that the state government must ensure that there is sufficient amount of electricity not only for the households but also for commercial consumers as well as the industries. There should be sufficient amount of electricity for agriculture sector also. So these are some of the objectives that have been set up under the concept of Power for All scheme, which is supposed to be achieved by the April 2019. Done. So this article basically discusses the status of implementation of this particular scheme. So this is a discussion here. Based on this, I have given a question. Consider the following statements regarding Power for All scheme. It is a joint initiative of International Solar Alliance, United Nations Development Program and Government of India. Statement is wrong. It is a joint initiative between the central government, state governments as well as union territories. First statement is wrong. But there is a particular reason why I have given this particular statement. Very recently in the United Nations discussions, right, very recently it was there in the newspaper somewhere in mid of October. Government of India has introduced a proposal to give observer status to International Solar Alliance. Just remember this particular statement. Okay. Second, the target year for achieving the objective is 2030. Wrong. It was financial year, starting of the financial year 2020. Right. So both the statements are wrong. Right option will be option D, none of the above. Last 2 articles are related to indices. Okay. Because no questions have been asked in this year prelims on indices. Right, and there were discussion on very important indices in the last 1 week. I have picked up 2 indices here. One, food security index. What are the important points here? This particular food security index is released by Economist Impact. Okay, first point, it is released by Economist Impact. Done. Second important point. Okay, second very important point. This particular Economist Impact organization will evaluate the performance of 113 countries and provide them ranking. Third important point, what is India's ranking? As per this particular article, India stands at 71st position for the 2021 report. Fourth very important point, for evaluating the performance of these particular countries, this Economist Impact organization will measure the performance of these particular countries under 58 unique food security related parameters. Fifth important point, as per the latest report, this report mentions that performance of India in terms of food security in the last 10 years, in the last 10 decades has improved just marginally. Is okay, I will repeat it. The performance of India in providing food security in the last 10 years has improved marginally. For example, have a look at the data here. In the year 2012, India's performance in terms of ranking or let us say points was 54.5, and in 2021 this has increased to 57.2, that is marginal increase by 2.7 points. Right. So in the last 10 decades it has marginally improved in terms of providing food security. So these are some of the very important points with respect to food security index, which is published by Economist Impact. In addition to this, one more index here, pension index. Okay, very recently this was also there in the discussion. Pension index is basically published by Mercer CFA. Okay, Mercer CFA Global The name of that is Mercer CFA Global Pension Index Survey. Pension Index Survey. And what are the findings in this particular survey? First very important point, India's ranking stands at 40th position. And as per this particular document, it has evaluated the performance of 43 countries or 43 economies, out of which India's ranking is a 40th position, very, very low. What are the reasons? The article mentions that in case of India, the private sector, right, which provides the pension, right, wherein most of these particular people who are not, let's say, government employees will have to opt for pension scheme. The private sector arrangement in terms of pension is very, very low. Is it okay? Right, number of people who are working in case of unorganized sector in case of India is more than 90%, but the penetration from the private sector in terms of providing pension is very, very low. Right, and this particular article also mentions that in case of India, because majority of the working population falls in the unorganized sector, they are forced to save money out of their earnings and use it to provide the requirement or the premium for getting the pension coverage. So these are some of the very important points which have been mentioned under this particular pension index. Done. So these are the various important articles as well as the questions related to these particular articles for this particular duration of 16th to 22nd October 2021. That's it from my side for this particular week. If you like this particular initiative, please hit the like button, provide your valuable inputs in the comment section below. And if you like this particular initiative, please subscribe to BYJU'S IAS channel if you have not yet subscribed. Thank you. Have a good day.